When the apocalypse finally descended upon humanity, the entire world was thrown into absolute chaos and panic. But ironically, the end of the world started on a deceptively beautiful and peaceful morning, giving no warning of the nightmare to come. The lush, quiet forest stood perfectly still, looking completely ordinary, right up until the mysterious system forcefully integrated Earth into its ruthless multiversal survival game. While ordinary civilians were screaming and running for their lives, our protagonist found himself transported to a bizarre, desolate landscape. Armed with nothing but a basic bow and a quiver of arrows, he had to accept his new reality immediately. But as he watched a group of so-called chosen heroes and elite adventurers confidently march ahead, completely ignoring a low-tier archer like him, he didn't feel the paralyzing fear that consumed everyone else. Instead, he felt something far stranger. His survival instincts flared as a colossal corrupted treant materialized before them. With twisted wooden horns, glowing ethereal eyes, and a terrifying magical aura, this forest guardian was an absolute nightmare for any beginner. Staring up at the towering monstrosity from behind, the sheer, crushing scale of the creature would have made anyone else drop their weapons in despair, but our archer simply stood his ground, quietly analyzing the battlefield. A sense of peace? Absolutely not. This was a brutal awakening to a new reality, where only the strong survive, and the brief moment of silence in the forest was nothing but the calm before a bloody storm. Suddenly, his danger sense spiked. Without a second of hesitation, he drew his bow, spinning around and leaning back just in time to evade a lethal ambush raining down from the thick canopy above. The rustle of leaves and the heavy thud of boots launching off a thick wooden branch completely gave the attacker away. Someone had been silently tracking him through the trees, waiting for the perfect moment to strike while he was distracted. With a vicious screech, a crazed, blonde-haired rogue plunged his dagger down in a lethal surprise attack. Our protagonist barely managed to draw his own blade in time, locking weapons in a fierce, spark-flying clash that would instantly decide who lived and who died. The blonde attacker grinned maniacally, his eyes wide with the sadistic thrill of the hunt, completely convinced that he had just secured an easy kill. But he was dead wrong. Lying on the forest floor and covered in his own blood, our protagonist didn't scream or beg for mercy. Instead, a twisted, manic laugh erupted from his throat, his eyes glowing with an intense, unnatural crimson light. What he felt in that fleeting, dangerous moment between life and death wasn't paralyzing terror. It was pure, unadulterated excitement. But to understand how this seemingly ordinary guy transformed into a battle-crazed survivor, we have to rewind the clock to the days before the fall. Back on Earth, he was just an average, socially awkward corporate worker. In fact, he was so bad at socializing that he literally had to listen to self-help audiobooks offering 10 key tips for conversation just to survive office life. One day, while waiting in the building, he found himself standing right next to a female co-worker, trapped in a suffocatingly quiet and awkward atmosphere. Sweating nervously, he desperately tuned into his podcast, letting the narrator's advice about maintaining eye contact and projecting confident body language echo in his ears. He subtly shifted his posture, his heart pounding in his chest as he mentally prepared himself for what felt like a high-stakes boss battle, initiating basic small talk. Stealing a quick, anxious glance in her direction, his mind raced with overthinking, wondering if she was even looking at him or just waiting to escape the awkward silence. Finally gathering his courage, he pulled off one of his ear cups and awkwardly blurted out a question about her weekend. To his absolute relief, she stammered back a friendly reply, successfully completing his grueling mission of acting like a normal human being. "Oh, it was great. You know, me and my husband tried to head out to the lake for fishing, but with this weather," she happily replied, completely unaware of the mental victory he was celebrating. But as soon as the brief conversation ended and he stepped into the elevator alone, the heavy silence returned, crashing down on him like a physical weight. Slumping against the cold elevator wall, he clutched his head in frustration. "What the hell is wrong with me?" he muttered, exhausted by his own pathetic inability to hold a simple conversation. For some reason, no matter how hard he tried, making friends and building connections always felt like an impossible, insurmountable task. I took this out-of-state office job to try and start fresh, to force myself to change, he thought, staring blankly at his own reflection in the elevator doors. But reality was harsh. "It's been years, and I still can't get it right," he sighed, remembering the lively office environment where everyone else seemed to effortlessly joke and bond, while he remained an invisible ghost in the background. In this society that values social skills above all else, I don't know if I'll ever fit in, he thought, visualizing the confident, charismatic people who effortlessly commanded attention and climbed the corporate ladder. They were the natural leaders, the ones who always knew exactly what to say, while he was the silent observer, forever trapped on the outside looking in. Because he was so bad at interacting with others, the only sports he ever picked up as a kid were the ones he could do entirely alone, without relying on teammates, like archery. For years, he spent countless hours in an empty hall, repeatedly drawing back the bowstring and sinking arrows into the center of the target, with absolute solitary precision. But he quickly realized that the modern world isn't designed for people like him. While social butterflies thrived, he remained stuck at his desk, staring blankly at the screen. So now his daily routine consisted of just sitting alone in his cubicle for hours on end, entirely isolated from the rest of his co-workers. The clock slowly dragged from 9:02 a.m. to 10:24 a.m., the endless hours blending together into a monotonous blur. 0:35. By 12:35 p.m., the crushing reality set in. He was wasting his life away in a city with no family and an office where barely anyone even knew his name. "Hey, Jake!" A cheerful voice suddenly broke his gloomy thoughts. Startled, he looked up to see a tall, blonde coworker waving enthusiastically in his direction. "A couple of us are heading out for lunch. Want to come?" The blonde coworker asked with an easy, welcoming smile, effortlessly bridging the gap between them. This was Adam. He was a natural-born leader and the complete opposite of our protagonist. Yet, surprisingly, they had somehow managed to become friends. Unlike the exhausting effort it took to interact with others, Adam never seemed to mind doing all the heavy lifting in a conversation, which made things incredibly easy for him. Sitting at the conference table, he watched quietly as Adam effortlessly commanded the room, his charismatic energy easily capturing the attention of the female co-workers. Normally, he would have instantly declined such a group outing, preferring the safety of his solitary desk. But looking at Adam's genuinely friendly expression, he figured that maybe with him around, things wouldn't be quite so excruciatingly awkward. Forcing a stiff but polite smile, he finally pushed past his social anxiety and agreed, muttering a quiet, "Okay, sure," before he could overthink it and change his mind. The two of them made their way down the hall, standing in a brief, comfortable silence, until the familiar ding of the elevator doors sliding open interrupted their wait. As they stepped forward, they were greeted by the sight of two female colleagues already waiting inside the car. His eyes immediately darted toward Caroline from HR. Standing right next to the purple-haired coworker he had struggled to talk to earlier was Caroline, looking sharp, confident, and professional in her blue jacket and glasses. Caught off guard by the sudden confined social space, his eyes widened slightly in mild panic as Adam smoothly broke the ice, cheerfully asking the girls if they were also heading out for lunch. Caroline smiled warmly at the guys, holding her bag with a playful glint in her eye, as she happily announced that she happened to have the almighty company card with her. Seeing her friendly and upbeat demeanor, our protagonist couldn't help but relax just a fraction, secretly admitting to himself that Caroline's cheerful personality was one of the very few bright spots of working in this suffocating corporate office. The elevator quickly filled with easy laughter as Caroline playfully nudged Adam's shoulder, joking that he was absolutely going to get fired one of these days, with how recklessly he abused that company expense card. But amidst the lively banter, Caroline suddenly turned her golden eyes toward our quiet protagonist, flashing him a direct, knowing smile, as she pointed out how surprisingly rare it was to actually see him join them for a group lunch. He smiled a bit bitterly to himself, realizing a rather pathetic truth. Despite her bubbly and friendly demeanor toward the group, she never actually bothered to say his name. He tried to rationalize it in his head, desperately hoping that it was just a coincidence. There was no way she didn't know it after all this time working in the same department together, right? But as he watched her gaze linger and her hands playfully grab onto Adam's arm, he accepted the reality. Her attention, just like everyone else's in the office, was often focused entirely on the charismatic blonde leader. Suddenly, his self-deprecating thoughts were violently interrupted. A deafening, bone-rattling rumble echoed through the metal shaft, shaking the very foundation of the building. The entire elevator jolted aggressively, throwing the office workers completely off balance, as panic instantly set in. Someone yelled out in sheer terror, desperately asking what the hell was happening. Trying to maintain his cool leader persona while shielding Caroline, Adam quickly spoke up, attempting to reassure the terrified group that it was probably just a minor electrical issue. But a second, even more violent rumble proved him completely wrong. The floor literally dropped from beneath their feet, sending the group tumbling over each other as the lights began to flicker wildly. As the horrifying sensation of free fall took over and gravity seemed to vanish, Adam lost his composure, screaming at our protagonist at the top of his lungs to hit the emergency button. Reacting purely on adrenaline, he threw his weight forward and slammed his fist directly into the glowing red emergency panel, praying for the emergency brakes to engage. But his stomach dropped into a bottomless pit of despair as Caroline cried out in absolute terror. The button was completely dead, and absolutely nothing was stopping their horrific plunge into the darkness. As the elevator continued its terrifying plunge, the emergency lights violently flickered before dying out completely, plunging the confined space into pitch-black darkness. Panic erupted as confused voices cried out, demanding to know what just happened to the power. In the suffocating darkness, the terrifying freefall seemed to halt. The heavy silence was broken only by their rapid breathing, and Adam desperately asking if everyone was okay. But before anyone could answer the question, a strange, ethereal blue light suddenly pierced through the pitch-black void, casting an eerie glow on their terrified faces. Out of nowhere, accompanied by a sharp electronic chime, a massive holographic blue window materialized right in front of them in the darkness, bearing the ominous words, "System Message." Suddenly, the cramped walls of the elevator inexplicably vanished. The group found themselves standing in the middle of an open city street under a strange, starry twilight sky. The massive holographic screen floated above the skyscrapers, announcing the initiation of the 93rd universe and the commencement of a deadly tutorial sequence. The reality they once knew was shattering before their very eyes. The perspective violently zoomed out, revealing planets and meteors suspended in the vast, cold, and unforgiving expanse of outer space. Stripped of his mundane life and floating in a desolate, rocky void, the protagonist's body began to glow with strange, cosmic patterns. He stared up at the massive system screen, slowly processing the absurd reality that their entire universe had just been assimilated into a multiversal game. The disorienting cosmic vision suddenly ended, and he found himself standing completely alone in an endless blank white void. Still wearing his everyday office clothes, he looked around in utter confusion, calling out into the emptiness, completely unaware of the brutal nightmare that was about to begin. As his vision adjusted to the blinding whiteness, the endless void began to take shape. A sterile gray table materialized out of thin air, and sitting directly across from him was a strange, motionless figure. The being was entirely alien, clad in smooth gray armor-like skin, with a completely faceless head shaped almost like an anvil. Without moving a muscle, it spoke to him with a cold, mechanical tone. "Greetings, human." The sheer absurdity of the situation, combined with the lingering adrenaline from the elevator's freefall, finally caused him to snap. His eyes wide with panic and confusion, he screamed at the creature. His voice echoed through the empty space as he desperately demanded to know what the hell was sitting in front of him and where he had been taken. Completely unfazed by his outburst, the entity responded with chilling indifference. It introduced itself simply as the guide to his new reality, sternly adding that their time for this introduction was limited and he needed to listen carefully. Bewildered, Jake barely had time to ask what new reality it was talking about. His question was abruptly cut off by a sharp electronic chime as a glowing blue holographic screen projected directly in front of his face. The translucent window displayed a system message containing his personal status. It read like a menu from a video game, listing his full name, Jake Thane, his race as a level 0 human, along with his base health, mana, and stamina pools. A second window popped up, detailing his core attributes, every aspect of his physical and mental being. Strength, endurance, perception, and willpower had been quantified into mere cold numbers. Staring at the screen in disbelief, Jake cautiously reached out to touch the floating projection, asking what exactly he was looking at. The faceless entity calmly replied that this was the system, the absolute interface that would govern the pertinent details of his new existence. The white void around them suddenly shifted, revealing a breathtaking backdrop of galaxies and crumbling asteroids. The entity delivered the final, crushing truth. Their universe had crossed a cosmic threshold, forcefully integrating them into a merciless multiverse, and from now on, the rules of survival would only be revealed as he needed to know them. After a moment of absolute silence, Jake slowly turned back around, taking a seat at the glowing table as he finally began to digest the absurd, cosmic scale of the nightmare he had been thrown into. Surrounding him was the breathtaking yet terrifying expanse of outer space, with massive planets and nebulas looming in the background. "I can't tell if this is amazing or absurd," he muttered, still trying to grasp the reality of the situation. The massive blue system window hovered steadily over the table. With the introduction over, the faceless entity bluntly stated, "Now, on to classes." With a simple point of its finger, the entity summoned a collection of glowing, ethereal weapons. A giant axe, a mage's staff, a sleek bow, and a sharp sword, floating gracefully over the table's surface. Jake leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand as he studied the glowing armaments. "So I'm just supposed to pick one of these?" he asked, trying to figure out the catch. The entity replied with a single cold word, "Precisely." As Jake leaned in closer to inspect the choices, the entity continued its mechanical explanation, noting that each class came with different starting stat bonuses and distinct combat proficiencies. He carefully considered his options, his mind racing through the possibilities. It all seems more or less self-explanatory. Caster sounds interesting, but there should be, he muttered, scanning the floating weapons until his eyes landed on a very familiar shape. "There it is!" A confident, almost relieved smile broke across Jake's face. Without a second thought, he firmly pointed his finger at the glowing bow, knowing exactly what weapon suited his solitary nature. A new system window instantly popped up, officially confirming his choice. "You have chosen the Archer class." The entity then warned him that his allotted introduction time was ending, and he was about to be transported to the Great Forest tutorial zone. "Great Forest?" Jake asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. But before he could get an answer, his vision began to blur as the celestial room dissolved around him, preparing to drop him straight into his very first trial of survival. His vision quickly focused as he found himself completely surrounded by dense, towering trees. But the forest wasn't empty. A pair of glowing yellow eyes glared at him from the shadows, belonging to a massive crimson-scaled dinosaur-like beast. The system interface immediately updated, confirming his arrival in the tutorial zone. It explained that this great forest was deliberately filled with a mix of lethal danger and rare opportunities specifically designed for newly initiated races to test their mettle. As he slowly backed away, trying to keep his distance, he spotted another massive predator lurking in the undergrowth. A giant, mutated wild boar with razor-sharp tusks and thick, matted fur. The system continued its tutorial prompt, explaining that by hunting these roaming beasts, initiates could acquire tutorial points, or TP, which could then be spent to purchase new equipment and unlock far more powerful combat skills. The deeper he looked into the darkened woods, the more horrifying mutations he saw, each creature looking more twisted and deadly than the last, all fighting for supremacy in this enclosed ecosystem. The final line of the system message hung ominously in the air. If he managed to survive and grow strong enough, he might even earn the rare chance to hunt the elusive beast lords themselves, the undisputed apex predators of this tutorial zone. Still trying to process the sheer scale of what he was supposed to accomplish, Jake had asked the entity back in the white void one crucial question: exactly how long this brutal tutorial was going to last. The faceless guide had answered clearly. The tutorial was set to last for exactly 64 days, after which the remaining survivors would be granted their final rewards based entirely on the amount of TP they managed to collect. Remembering that conversation as he stood in the dangerous forest, Jake looked down at his own hands, expecting to feel the familiar, paralyzing fear of his old corporate life. But surprisingly, he didn't feel afraid. A confident, almost crazed smile spread across his face as he realized his heart was pounding not with terror, but with a strange, intoxicating thrill. For the first time in his life, this deadly new reality actually felt exciting. When the blinding light finally faded, he found himself staring out at an endless expanse of towering trees and ancient crumbling pillars stretching as far as the eye could see. This was the Great Forest. The sheer scale of the wilderness was breathtaking, a sprawling, untamed sea of green that hid untold dangers and mysteries beneath its thick canopy. Around him, the rest of his co-workers had also been transported to the top of the ruins, now suddenly clad in basic fantasy armor and clutching various starting weapons. Panic immediately erupted as they screamed, demanding to know what was going on and where they were, while the others freaked out over their sudden change in wardrobe and bizarre location. Jake sat surprisingly calm, quietly taking stock of his new reality and his chosen archer gear. He stood up, firmly gripping the polished wood of his bow and testing the familiar weight of the leather arm guard strapped to his forearm. A confident smile crossed his face as he felt the sturdiness of his equipment. Not bad, he thought, genuinely pleased with the starting gear the system had provided him. He tightened his grip on the bowstring, feeling a natural, almost instinctual affinity for the weapon, a sharp contrast to the clumsy, terrified confusion of his peers. He shifted his gaze back to the sprawling horizon, realizing just how massive this forest truly was. Finding a way out of here was going to be an overwhelming task. But before the group's panic could spiral completely out of control, Adam stepped to the front, raising his hands. "Everybody, relax," he announced, effortlessly falling back into his natural leadership role. "I know we're all confused, but let's just take a second to breathe." Adam's commanding voice surprisingly worked. The frantic murmuring among the co-workers slowly died down as they turned to him, clutching their newfound weapons and waiting for directions. But before Adam could formulate a plan, a sharp, cracking sound echoed from the edge of the ruin. "The ground's moving," one of the girls shrieked, pointing at the fractured stone beneath her feet. Adam quickly stepped forward, grabbing the shoulder of a panicking co-worker to steady him. "We're going down, everybody. Stay calm," he ordered, maintaining his composure as the massive stone platform began to slowly descend like a giant ancient elevator. As the platform descended deeper into the unknown, a dark, heavy sense of foreboding settled in Jake's chest. Looking back, he thought, "At that time, I wish I had known." Meanwhile, beasts weren't the only things on the hunt. Deep within a different section of the forest, a heavily armed party of survivors marched cautiously through the dense, sun-dappled foliage. The party moved in a tight defensive formation, their weapons drawn and ready. Suddenly, a distinct rustle echoed from the thick bushes nearby, instantly putting the entire group on high alert. The lead warrior, a burly man with a thick beard and heavy shoulder armor, raised a clenched fist to halt the group. "You guys hear that?" he asked in a low, tense whisper. "Is someone following us?" Drawing his sword, the lead warrior stepped forward, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. "We know you're there. Show yourself," he demanded, his voice echoing through the quiet forest. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. It was a young, blonde-haired man wearing a green cloak, holding his hands up defensively. "I'm just trying to find my party," he pleaded, his face smeared with dirt and sweat. The lead warrior lowered his sword slightly, signaling his party to stand down. "It's a kid," he announced over his shoulder. The green-haired mage behind him stepped forward, offering a soft smile. "It's okay, we're not gonna attack you," she reassured him gently. The blonde kid slowly lowered his hands, visibly relieved. The lead warrior kept a cautious eye on him, asking, "When did you last see them?" Rubbing the dirt off his cheek, the kid nervously explained, "We were jumped right when we arrived. I got separated during the fight." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "That was hours ago." The lead warrior sighed heavily, sharing a concerned look with the green-haired mage. "They could be anywhere," he muttered, knowing full well how dangerous the forest was. Despite the risks of taking on a straggler, the lead warrior's expression softened. "All right, kid, why don't you stick with us for now?" he offered, deciding they couldn't just leave him to die. The green-haired mage smiled warmly, patting the kid's shoulder. "We'll help you find your party," she promised, trying to comfort the seemingly terrified survivor. But what the party couldn't see, hidden beneath the folds of his green cloak, was the kid's right hand slowly creeping toward the hilt of his weapon. "Really? Thank you so much," the kid replied, his eyes wide with feigned gratitude and relief. "I was so scared out here alone," he continued, his voice trembling with fake emotion, while his hand firmly gripped the hilt of a bloody hunting knife strapped to his belt. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of the great forest, casting long shadows over the bewildered group. Still dressed in their mundane office attire mixed with basic fantasy gear, they stood together in the middle of the alien wilderness, completely uncertain of their next move. The initial adrenaline was rapidly wearing off, replaced by the creeping dread of their situation. The anxiety began to bubble up again as one of the co-workers looked to the others, his voice cracking as he desperately asked what they were supposed to do now. The sheer absurdity of their predicament was finally hitting them. The guy with the red scarf threw his hands up in disbelief, wildly asking if anyone else had met a freaking alien before being forcefully dropped into this twisted survival game. The purple-haired girl stood silently beside him, her expression tense as the heavy reality of that cold, faceless entity and the system's absolute authority fully sunk in. But before the panic could spread and paralyze the party, Adam stepped right into the middle of the group. With a calm, grounding presence, he looked them in the eyes and reassured them that everything was going to be okay, urging everyone to just take it one step at a time. Standing quietly in the back, Jake watched how effortlessly Adam managed to diffuse the rising hysteria. Even trapped in a deadly, otherworldly forest, Adam's charisma shone through, making Jake realize that the man truly was a natural-born leader. Taking immediate charge of the situation, Adam refused to let them wallow in fear. Clapping his hands to get their attention, he confidently declared that it was time to get moving and start focusing on the basics. He guided the party forward through the thick underbrush, laying out their very first objective, locating a safe shelter, a clean water source, and food. Recalling the vast landscape, Adam astutely pointed out that based on the ancient pillars they had seen from above, they definitely weren't the only survivors out here. Putting their survival instincts to the test, the guy with the red scarf quickly managed to rig a crude snare, successfully capturing a bizarre, dark-feathered bird. He hoisted his catch up with a relieved grin, exclaiming in shock that his makeshift trap actually worked. Meanwhile, the purple-haired girl began testing the limits of her new class, summoning a swirling, vibrant aura of magical energy around her body. She firmly stated that this brief period of calm was absolutely crucial. They needed to use this time to learn their newly acquired skills and get a proper hang of the system before the real monsters found them. Moving quietly through the brush, Adam spotted a large, horned beast grazing in the clearing, quietly muttering that their party was thankfully pretty well balanced for the most part. Suddenly, without a sound, a sharp projectile cut through the air, heading straight toward their target. Adam snapped his head up in shock as a lethal arrow streaked past him at incredible speed. The arrow hit its mark with deadly precision, piercing straight through the beast's skull and instantly dropping it to the ground. Standing a short distance away, Jake lowered his bow, looking slightly surprised at his own effortless accuracy. Nearby, Caroline beamed with admiration, blushing slightly as she watched Jake showcase his remarkable archery skills. Caroline was serving as the party's only healer, but as she practiced channeling her magic, she was quickly getting the hang of her new abilities. As night fell over the dangerous wilderness, the group gathered closely around a warm campfire, sharing a quiet moment of relief. Breaking the silence, Caroline turned to Jake with a warm smile, telling him, "You're pretty good with a bow, Jake." Hearing her say those simple words, a deep blush spread across Jake's face, his heart skipping a beat as he happily thought to himself, "She knows my name." Sitting quietly by the crackling fire, Jake pulled his knees up, a heavy realization weighing on his mind as he thought, "I know everyone's been defaulting to me because of our old jobs and all, but I could sure use a hand when things get rough." Sensing his internal tension, Adam casually walked over and rested a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder, offering a silent show of support. Looking up with a flustered, sweaty expression, Jake stammered, "I'm not cut out for that. I can't really speak to people like you two can." Adam and Caroline exchanged a knowing look, recognizing the deep-seated self-doubt that Jake had carried with him from their old lives. Leaning in closely, Adam offered a stern yet grounding truth, telling him, "It's a new world out here. The old rules don't apply anymore." Hours later, as the deep silence of the wilderness took over, the party settled in for the first watch of the night. The group lay resting around the glowing embers of the campfire, wrapped in the quiet exhaustion of their first day in this terrifying new reality. Sitting side by side in the dark, the purple-haired girl quietly opened up to Jake, whispering, "You know, my husband was going to meet me for lunch today. There were probably only a few hundred feet between us when it all went crazy." As she shared her heartbreaking memory, her hand gently brushed against Jake's arm, seeking a small ounce of comfort in the terrifying void. Turning his head to look at her with a gentle, empathetic gaze, she suddenly broke the heavy atmosphere by looking right into his eyes and asking, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Jake's expression darkened slightly as he gave a firm, cold answer. "No. Not anymore," he added quietly, his mind drifting back to a time before everything fell apart, remembering how back in college he only had two real friends, Andy and Madeline. Andy was his roommate and an all-around great guy, the kind of person he could genuinely trust with his life. And then there was Madeline, the person who meant everything to him. "I was in love," Jake recalled, thinking back to how neither of them were particularly social types. Yet they deeply enjoyed the quiet solitude they found together. "Those were the happiest 2 years of my life," he thought, though a bitter realization quickly followed. Or maybe I had just convinced myself of that. A painful memory flashed in his mind, returning home with a bag of groceries, completely blind to what was happening right under his nose. As he walked down the hallway of his own home, his steps suddenly stopped as he noticed a discarded dress and pants lying directly on the floor. Back by the campfire, Tears streamed down the purple-haired woman's face as she wiped her eyes, whispering that she was probably better off alone, because just thinking about her husband made her stomach twist with anxiety. Sitting quietly in the shadows while the others rested, Jake kept his gaze lowered, a heavy realization forming in his mind as he thought, "I should say something." Gathering his courage, he stood up from the campfire and stepped forward, quietly calling out, "Excuse me?" The purple-haired woman turned and began walking down a quiet path leading away from the camp, disappearing deeper into the darkening forest. Watching her walk away into the shadows, Jake's thoughts raced as he reflected on his progress. Adam thinks I should be a leader. Joanna is opening up to me, and Caroline even remembered my name. A faint, hopeful spark flickered inside him as he thought, maybe Adam was right. Maybe things can be different here. His expression turned serious and resolute beneath his hood as he prepared to step forward and offer his help. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the canopy. "Ah!" Without a second of hesitation, Jake gripped his wooden bat tightly, his eyes narrowing with sharp focus. With a burst of explosive speed, he broke into a full sprint, shouting, "Dash!" as he vaulted forward to intercept the threat. Bursting through the tree line, he found a group of hostile, rough-looking survivors cornering someone, with their leader grinning mockingly as he sneered. "All right, little lady." One of the hostile raiders pointed aggressively toward the shadows, shouting, "It came from over there. Get 'em!" Thud. Another member of the group collapsed hard onto the forest floor, completely incapacitated. Emerging swiftly from the cover of the foliage, a sharp-eyed attacker moved with fierce intent. He swept across the terrain, closing in on his target with deadly momentum. Looking around in sudden panic, one of the raiders yelled out, "Where'd they go?" Right as Jake launched himself through the air, shouting, "Jump!" Moving with ruthless precision, Jake landed directly behind the raider, tightly gripping an arrow and pressing it against his neck. With a brutal motion, Jake drove the improvised weapon downward, causing the raider to grit his teeth in fury and snap. "Why, you little wart!" Another raider swung his heavy axe wildly, forcing Jake to release his grip and tumble backward. Jake flipped midair, narrowly evading the lethal swing as he plummeted toward the ground. The enraged raider raised his massive battle axe high above his head, letting out a furious battle cry as he prepared to crush him. The attacker dropped low into a wide stance, keeping his weapon ready for the next strike. Clunk! Sparks flew as the heavy metal weapons collided with tremendous force. Crack! Pressure mounted as the blades grated against each other, straining under the sheer weight of the blow. Nearby, Joanna lay collapsed on the ground, having passed out from the excruciating pain of her injuries, while the raiders demanded to know where the rest of her group was. Shit! Realizing the danger, Jake braced himself just as another raider lunged forward with a sweeping attack. Stomp! Heavy footsteps closed in from the brush, kicking up dirt and leaves. Jake's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as he muttered under his breath, "There's another one?" Swoosh! A barrage of deadly projectiles cut swiftly through the night air. Seeing the incoming attack, a wave of pure terror washed over him as he thought, "I'm gonna die." Closing his eyes tightly, Jake braced for the worst as the heavy pressure bore down on him. Time seemed to stretch and distort, the world around him shifting into a surreal, pulsing grid. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the air. It felt like time itself was slowing to a crawl. But this wasn't caused by magic or some external spell. A bright system window flashed into view, announcing, "Bloodline Awakened." Bloodline, the Primal Hunter. It was pure primal instinct taking over as his pupils dilated and glowed with an intense crimson light. Drop! Moving with sudden inhuman reflexes, Jake dropped low to the ground. Catch! With lightning-fast precision, his hand snapped out to snatch an incoming arrow right out of the air. Rising smoothly from the stance, Jake stood tall, a chillingly calm and confident smirk spreading across his face. Grah! The battlefield erupted into chaos as the tables instantly turned. An arrow struck true, piercing deep into the raider's chest as he let out a choked gasp of pure shock. Thump! The heavily armored fighter collapsed backward onto the dirt, completely defeated. Jake raised his hand, his fingers stained with fresh blood, his expression hardening into a fierce, unyielding resolve. Grab! Moving with lethal speed, he snatched up a fallen blade, unleashing a flurry of sharp, shimmering arcs. With cat-like agility, he landed gracefully on all fours, his body coiled and ready for the next strike. A fresh volley of arrows rained down from the darkness around him. Whoosh! Jake dodged and blurred through the air, easily evading the lethal projectiles. Dozens of shattered arrows littered the grass around his boots, proof of his impossible reflexes. Covered in blood and wearing a feral, unhinged grin, Jake stepped forward into the moonlight, challenging them with a fierce, adrenaline-fueled shout. "Come on!" With slow, menacing strides, he walked past a discarded sword lying on the ground, completely transformed into a terrifying predator of the new world. The mysterious figure stood quietly amidst the deep, blue-lit brush of the forest. His boots stepped silently across the grassy ground as he stalked his target. With wide, crazed eyes and bared teeth, the attacker lunged forward, clutching a sharp knife tightly in his hand. "There we go!" he shouted, closing the distance instantly. "Grab!" He threw his arms forward, violently tackling Jake to the ground. Straddling him in the dirt, the frantic attacker brandished his knife and screamed at the top of his lungs. "What the hell are you?" Thump! Jake slammed backward against the earth, but his bloody hand immediately reached out, fingers digging into the quiver at his side. Grab! Splunk! Without a second of hesitation, Jake drove an arrow straight through the attacker's head. The man's eyes rolled back as his arms flew up in a spasm, instantly robbed of life. Grab! Breathing heavily, Jake's hand shot up to grasp another arrow from his quiver, ready for whatever came next. Amidst the brutal clash, Jake stood bloodied and exhausted in the dim forest light. Slam! He delivered a fierce blow straight down onto his opponent. The silhouette of the intense struggle stretched across the clearing as the fight reached its brutal climax. As the dust settled, an urgent question pierced the silence. Adam and the rest of the party rushed into the clearing, their eyes wide with horror as Adam shouted, "Are you two okay? Quintal!" Lying side by side in pools of blood, the bodies of the fallen left the arriving group stunned, prompting a horrified whisper. What happened? Lying on the bloody grass, Jake stared up at the sky with wide, unblinking eyes. A twisted, triumphant smile crossed his blood-stained face as he whispered the final words. "I won." "I saw a girl getting bullied," he recalled, remembering how a group of students cornered her outside, demanding, "Come on, let us copy your test tomorrow." Terrified, she stammered, "What if I get caught? I don't want to get in trouble." But one of them dismissed her fears, saying, "No one's going to catch you. Just slide the test over when the teacher's not looking." The group crowded closely around her, hemming her in with threatening postures as she clutched her hands together in despair. Looking up with wide, tear-filled eyes, she pleaded, "I don't know. Maybe I could just help you guys study instead or something." "What a waste of time," one of them scoffed as he gave her a rough shove, pushing her aside. Seeing this injustice, Jake did the only thing he thought made sense and tried to help, lunging forward with a fierce shout. "Leave her alone!" Thump! The sudden tackle sent both of them tumbling hard onto the ground in a tangle of limbs. Pinning him to the dirt, the bewildered student yelled out in anger, "What the hell are you doing?" But it turns out, when it comes to good guys and bad guys, standing in the school office, the furious administrator pointed his finger at them and yelled, "You two are both suspended for fighting." Standing over the gruesome scene, Caroline and the rest of the party stared down in horror, trembling as Caroline whispered, "So much blood." Lying flat on his back in the middle of a massive crimson pool, Jake stared blankly upward. Sitting up and wiping the gore from his face, Jake reassured them calmly, "I'm okay. None of it's mine. A glowing blue notification popped up before his eyes, displaying a system message. You have slain human G, level 2/Archer, level 4. Bonus experience earned for killing an enemy above your level. 294 TP earned. Staring at the prompt, Jake thought to himself, what is all this? We get points for defeating other survivors too? Additional system messages cascaded down, detailing stat point allocations and level updates for his class and race. Wide-eyed and processing the notifications, Jake wondered silently, is this a new skill? Another window flashed open, revealing the description. Bloodline Awakened. Bloodline of the Primal Hunter. Bloodline ability, unique. Dormant power lies in the very essence of your being. Unlocks Sphere of Perception, plus 5% to perception. Staring at the text in disbelief, Jake thought, what the hell is a bloodline? Looking over at Adam, who asked in a panic, who were those guys? Why did they attack us? Jake stood up and answered, experience and tutorial points most likely. It looks like I gained a ton from just this fight alone. Jake continued, adding with a grim expression, we need to reconsider our survival strategy. Kneeling beside the injured woman, Caroline began channeling her healing magic, glowing brightly as she declared, we'll find a safe place to hide. Adam stepped over, scratching the back of his neck as he looked down at Jake, asking, wait, is this tutorial out or something? Striding away toward the perimeter, Caroline looked back over her shoulder in disbelief, demanding, why was Joanna alone? Looking up with a flustered expression, Jake stammered. She was feeling anxious. It seemed like she needed space. Enraged by the careless oversight, Caroline whirled around with a fierce expression, shouting, well, she's not doing well. Pointing down at Joanna's injured form, she lashed out. Her leg is too crushed for my healing, so what are we supposed to do? Adam stepped in, placing a calming hand on Caroline's shoulder, while looking at Jake, asking, are you blaming me for this? Looking back at Jake, Adam continued, no, you helped save her, but, I mean, why would you let her go off alone? And why didn't you wake us up? His expression turning serious and demanding, Adam pressed further. What were you thinking, Jake? Looking down with a remorseful expression, Jake answered quietly, I'm sorry. It was a split-second decision, and I followed my instinct. Standing over the injured woman, one of the survivors argued, can you try giving it some thought next time? We're humans, not beasts who act without care. Looking down at Jake, he pressed further, asking, what if you had died out here? Before Jake interrupted, saying, I told you I'm sorry. Enraged by the recklessness, Caroline shouted back, what if Joanna had died? She clenched her fists, her expression twisting with fury as she glared down at him. The rest of the party stood around in tense silence, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone. Clenching his fist tightly at his side, Jake finally snapped under the mounting pressure. Throwing his hands up in frustration, he yelled back, will you get a grip? Joanna only survived because of what I did. If I took the time to wake you all up, who knows what would have happened? Jake argued passionately. Caroline and Adam stared at him in shock, taken aback by his sudden outburst. Narrowing his eyes, Jake delivered a chilling reality check, saying, those were real humans, not deer. Would you have had the courage to take another person's life? Jake extended his hand, pointing a finger directly at Adam's chest to make his point clear. With an intense expression, Jake raised his voice, shouting, the world has changed, and you all need to stop expecting to have your hands held. Lowering his hand for emphasis, he pressed on. Learn to adapt if you want to survive. Adam stared back in disbelief, his jaw tightening as he challenged. What do you suggest we do? Turning away slightly with blood still staining his cloak, Jake fired back. I suggest you do whatever it takes to level up and make it through this mess. He glanced back over his shoulder, declaring, do what the system wants you to, and don't blame me just because you guys haven't caught up. The rest of the party stood in stunned silence, absorbing the harsh reality of Jake's words as they looked on. High above the treetops, a pair of large birds soared gracefully through the bright open sky. Beneath the canopy, a voice broke the quiet stillness, casually saying, hey, you're finally up. to which someone sleepily replied, "Casper?" Sitting together by the edge of the clearing, Jake rested while the others occupied themselves around the camp. Removing his glasses and rubbing his eyes, Jake muttered, "I half expected to wake up and see that everyone ditched me." Sitting nearby and carving a piece of wood, his companion answered quietly. Some of them thought about it, but after a bit of talking, we all agreed. Looking over with a serious expression, Jake noted, "We each need to start carrying our own weight." Thinking back to their old lives, Jake remembered, Casper used to do R&D at our old job. Besides Adam, he was probably the closest thing I had to a friend. We bonded over our pathetic romantic lives. It was good to have another ally around, he recalled, remembering a dating app notification flashing across Casper's phone screen with the message, "Sorry Casper, you've just been mega unmatched 6 times, a new record. Please swipe again in 48 hours, or pay $128.99 to refill your swipe meter." "It still is," Casper responded softly, sitting right beside him in the forest. Suddenly spotting someone approaching, Jake's eyes widened in shock as he called out, "Joanna!" adding, "We couldn't figure out how to save her leg, so this seemed like the best option." Joanna stepped forward into the light, leaning heavily on a staff, while revealing her right leg, which had been cleanly amputated below the knee and replaced with a sturdy wooden peg. Sitting beside Jake, Casper explained, "We're hoping once we level up, Caroline can learn some sort of regrowth magic." Thinking it over, Jake figured, maybe I'll just pretend like nothing even happened, and decided, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. 1 hour later, Casper stood holding a clump of mud, asking, "Are you sure about this?" While Jake sat nearby blindfolded, giving a thumbs up. "Yeah, just toss it at me," Jake instructed, prompting Casper to reply, "Okay," as he drew back his arm. Leaning forward with a focused expression, Casper shouted, "All right, Jake, sense the incoming attack." Jake concentrated deeply beneath the blindfold, thinking, "Focus your breath," and splat! The muddy clump struck Jake squarely in the back, leaving a messy brown splotch across his cloak as he wondered in frustration. Why didn't that work? Looking down at the mess, Casper asked, "Are you okay? I tried not to throw it too hard." While Jake reasoned to himself, maybe the sphere of perception only works on actual threats. Examining his stained hand, Jake realized, since Casper didn't really want to hurt me, it didn't trigger anything. Standing in the distance, Adam raised his hand and called out to the group, "Let's call it for the day, guys. We need to find shelter for tonight." Approaching a dark opening in the rock face, Adam paused and remarked, "This looks like a safe spot. We'll be covered from the rain at least." As the group filed in together, Adam noted, "It'll limit the angle at which people could ambush us." Walking just behind the others, Jake kept a focused expression, thinking to himself, "As long as I stay alert, we should be safe from any more attacks." Adam walked over to Jake, glancing at him as he asked, "Still thinking about last night?" Jake offered a quiet, thoughtful smile, replying, "Just don't want to make the same mistake twice." Placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder, Adam apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for dogpiling on you. You didn't deserve that." Raising a torch high to illuminate the cavern, Adam instructed, "All right, guys, let's head further in and find a good place to set up." Following closely behind, Jake watched him and reflected, "Adam's a good man. I don't know if this group would have survived that first day without his leadership." Jake finished with a small, appreciative smile. Remembering how Adam had supported him back at the office, Jake thought back to when Adam had extended a friendly hand and said, "Jake, right?" Flashing a warm smile, Adam had told him, "I requested to have you on my team. Hope you don't mind." "Call it a hunch, but I think we'd work well together. Let me take you out to lunch," Adam had offered. Caught completely off guard, Jake had stammered back, "Sure." Crack! Suddenly, a terrifying, deafening crack echoed through the cave, making Adam raise his torch as he shouted, "What was that?" The entire cavern shuddered violently as the party braced themselves against the walls. Weapons drawn, the group immediately shifted into a defensive stance, scanning the darkening tunnels in panic. Crack! Slam! Massive boulders began breaking loose from the ceiling, shaking the ground violently. Slam! Falling debris crashed down all around them, and Jake's eyes widened in sheer panic as he yelled, "We need to go!" Scrambling frantically against the shaking stone walls, Jake desperately tried to avoid the crushing cave-in. Amidst the chaos, Adam shouted in a panic, "Everybody run!" Dash! The group scrambled frantically as rocks continued to crack and shatter from the ceiling above. Spotting danger ahead, Jake cried out in alarm, "Caroline!" Boulders rained down heavily around them, cutting off escape paths as Caroline looked up in terror. Fall! More massive chunks of rock broke away from the overhead ledge. Standing alone in the path of the falling debris, Caroline braced herself as the massive boulders plunged downward, pulling back his bowstring with intense focus. Jake braced himself as the cavern began to collapse around them. Skid! His boots scraped hard against the shaking stone floor as he threw all his momentum forward. Dash! Moving with blinding speed, he launched himself across the hazardous terrain to reach Caroline just in time. Diving through the falling debris, Jake grabbed hold of her, shielding her with his own body as heavy boulders rained down. Grab! He locked arms with her, pulling her out of harm's way as the ground fractured violently beneath them. Thud! The two of them tumbled hard onto the dirt floor as a massive wall of rubble crashed down right beside them. Breathing heavily, Jake looked down at her amidst the dust and silence, panting as he asked, "Are you okay?" Catching her breath, Caroline looked back at him and answered quietly, "I think so." On the other side of the massive rock wall that now blocked the tunnel, Adam raised his torch and shouted in despair, "Jake!" Pressing his hands against the cold stone barrier, Adam desperately called out again, "Caroline!" Shouting toward the blocked barrier, Caroline yelled back, "Can you hear me? We're here!" Keeping close to the cavern walls, Jake raised a hand as he whispered, "We should be quiet. This cave is clearly unstable." Raising a finger to his lips, Jake motioned for silence, adding, "Not to mention what else might be lurking in here." Squeak, squeak, squeak! Strange noises echoed from the dark corners around them. Pressing her hand against the rocky wall, Caroline noted, "There are too many to move." One of the group members readied a heavy tool, declaring, "I'll try breaking through this wall." But Adam immediately stopped him, warning, "No, we shouldn't touch anything." Nearby, one of the members stood trembling with a panicked expression. Gripping her staff tightly, she protested, "We can't just leave them in there." Looking ahead into the gloom, Adam reassured them, "There are other pathways in this cave. We just need to keep walking. They have to intersect somewhere." Reflecting on the situation, Jake thought, "That's not necessarily true, but it's probably our safest option." Speaking up through the cracks in the barrier, Jake called out, "All right, we'll go further in and try to meet you halfway." He continued down the dark path, thinking, "Though we still don't know what type of beasts are in here." Walking cautiously through the dim tunnels, Jake weighed his odds. "I'll probably be fine on my own, but can I protect Caroline if we're attacked?" Glancing over at her in the darkness, Jake offered a calm, steady presence. Turning to face her, Jake reassured her softly, "We'll be okay, Adam." Caroline stood firm beside him, her expression hardening with fierce determination. Looking ahead with a resolute smirk, Caroline declared, "I'm not gonna die in some cave." Taken aback by her sudden display of grit, Jake stared at her with wide eyes, a subtle smile touching his face. Walking deeper through the dim underground passage, illuminated only by torchlight, one of the members hesitated, asking with concern, "Was this a bad idea?" Joanna looked over at the others, stating pragmatically, "Those two are probably better suited for surviving here than we are." The warrior holding the large hammer spoke up, remarking, "Jake makes me a little uneasy, but there's no denying he's the strongest of us." With a furrowed brow and an analytical stare, he continued, "Not to mention Caroline's healing." Hearing his words, Adam turned his gaze toward him with a sharp, inquisitive expression. "Uneasy?" Adam questioned, prompting the fighter to quickly clarify. I agree with the kid, of course. We all need to be stronger to make it through this thing, he added, turning to look back as he voiced his real concern. His eyes narrowed in suspicion, adding in a low voice, "But you saw him, Adam." Remembering the unsettling sight of Jake lying in a red pool and grinning like a madman, Adam kept his thoughts to himself. Brushing off the lingering tension, Adam rationalized. He barely survived an attack. I can't blame a little strange behavior. Adam cast his gaze downward, his expression growing thoughtful and heavy. The fighter continued softly. People change in times of crisis. Jake's a loose cannon right now. Adam squared his shoulders, defending his comrade with conviction. He's a friend. Meanwhile, deeper within the interconnected tunnels, Jake and Caroline stood side by side in the dim light. Glancing over at Jake, Caroline noticed a crimson stain and stated, "You're hurt." Looking down at his sleeve in surprise, Jake replied, "Must have been from the fall." A jagged tear across his white sleeve revealed a bleeding scratch on his arm. Caroline stepped closer and offered, "Here, let me heal you." Looking up at her, Jake hesitated and asked, "But aren't you mad at me?" To which Caroline firmly replied, "I'm not going to let your wound infect just because we got in an argument. Now stand still." As her hands began to glow with warm, golden healing magic over his injury, Jake's inner thoughts chimed in. What do I say in this situation? Remember your conversation training. Ask her a question. While working on the wound, Caroline added, "You should try being more careful. We get that you're strong, but no one is invincible." Jake looked at her with a gentle expression as the magic worked. She continued, "And I'm still just learning this magic stuff, so I can't heal everything." Remembering his conversation training, Jake seized the opening and asked, "Why did you choose to be a healer?" Caught slightly off guard by the question, Caroline paused and looked up at him in surprise. "Pick the one I'd be best at. For survival and all." "Survival," Caroline continued. "That's why I chose healer. I didn't know much about the tutorial," Caroline explained, continuing, "but I've played enough games to know healer would be the least picked class." Looking over at her, Jake asked, "You play games?" To which Caroline answered with a slight smile, "Not anymore. My younger brother spent a lot of time in the hospital when we were kids. Sometimes I'd go weeks without being able to visit, so we made a point of playing games together online." As she recalled the memory, she sat at her computer desk, playing late into the night. Taken slightly aback, Jake thought to himself, "I didn't know she had a brother." Blushing and flustered, Caroline quickly changed the subject, stammering, "Anyways, everyone," Caroline continued, "everyone always made me play a healer because I was a girl. At first I hated it. I wanted to be a fighter too. Who wouldn't want to do tons of damage? But then I started to notice that the fighters always had trouble finding parties. Meanwhile, as a healer, people were going out of their way to request I join them. No matter what game it was, I could find someone that needed me. I guess I figured this tutorial would be no different. I didn't know who I'd run into here in the forest, but I knew that if I could heal, I'd be worth protecting. I'd survive." Smiling slightly, Jake remarked, "That's really smart." To which Caroline snapped back, "Did you think I was dumb?" Letting out a sigh as she finished tending to his arm, she muttered, "Or maybe you just never thought much about me at all." As she finished wrapping his arm, Jake thought to himself, "Maybe she's right. I thought I had a crush on her this whole time. But maybe I've never actually stopped to think about who she actually is as a person." "Pull!" Caroline secured the bandage neatly, telling him, "All right, you're as good as new." Standing back up with his gear in hand, Jake urged, "Let's keep moving." Advancing further into the cavern, they soon reached a dead end, with Jake observing a fork in the path. They walked cautiously forward, inspecting the diverging stone corridors. Looking over at Jake with uncertainty, Caroline asked, "What should we do?" Squeak, squeak, squeak! Faint, high-pitched noises echoed from deep within the dark recesses of the tunnel. Pausing abruptly, Jake's eyes narrowed as he listened closely to the sounds. Leaning in close with a torch, Caroline whispered urgently, "Jake, do you feel that?" Standing tense and alert, Jake held his ground, while Caroline grasped his shoulder in apprehension. Narrowing his eyes with a focused expression, Jake thought to himself, "My sphere of perception didn't activate, but it's like I can sense something down there." Staring into the pitch-black abyss ahead, a heavy, suffocating tension filled the air. Out of the deep darkness, dozens of glowing blue eyes suddenly stared back at them, clustered tightly along the cavern walls. A wide, adrenaline-fueled grin spread across Jake's face as he whispered with excitement, "Something terrifying."